Greg Ehrenberg here from Awesemo.com. I'm about to break down the massive 13-game MLB slate for FanDuel by highlighting some of my favorite tournament plays of the slate. Like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. But first, shout out to Prize Picks, the sponsor of today's show. If you guys are signing up at Prize Picks for the first time, use the promo code Awesemo because you get up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit. And that's the best way to make money in the DFS and sports betting industry. While we try to offer the best picks possible, we're not giving you free money, which is something you could get if you sign up using our promo code Awesemo. But talking about FanDuel tonight, these are what I think are some of the top tournament plays on the slate. Starting with some of my top stacks, and in general, I said this on the DraftKings video that I just recorded as well, a lot of the ownership is pretty spread out, so there aren't that many offenses where we look at and be like, oh, this is a massively negatively leveraged spot. Whereas it's like last night, if you looked at our top stacks tool, there was individual teams like the Brewers, the Cubs, the Red Sox. They're projected to have pretty heavy negative leverage. It's a lot flatter across the board today when there's so many spots to choose from. The ownership is also spread out. But I think we could really narrow in on some of the top spots. And that starts at Coors Field with the Rockies. It's Colorado, it's Coors Field. And honestly, the Rockies offense has been better than expected this year, even by WRC+. They've been really good against left-handed pitching. Not as much against righties, but still, they're in Coors Field. It's in altitude. They have a matchup against Edward Cabrera, who's a really well-regarded young pitcher. But at least to this point, we haven't seen that lead to any kind of real significant results. So far, Edward Cabrera has only been pitching in the minor leagues this season with a 4.56 ERA, so not all that great. But last year in his rookie season, we saw him make 7 starts at the big league level, and those didn't go all that well either. 5.81 ERA, 6.63 FIP in the 7 starts he made with the Marlins last year. So I think there is reason to be concerned with Edward Cabrera, at least as of now. There's a lot of young pitching prospects that have really good stuff, but doesn't really lead to results right away. It looks like Edward Cabrera is still figuring it out. And I think that a spot where he's pitching in altitude at Coors Field, tough spot to kind of figure it out on the fly. We do have the Rockies projected the second best top stack odds on the FanDuel slate. I think this is a good spot to take advantage of. The Rockies, one of my favorite tournament stacks of the day. Another team that I like to get to for tournament purposes, the Boston Red Sox over on FanDuel. And this is a team that's been massively popular for the last, week or so across FanDuel and DraftKings. This has been the chalk team on basically every single slate. And they've generally delivered in those chalk spots, with last night being the one exception. So Boston, one of the most popular teams on last night's slate, they finally dudded. And as a result, it looks like the field is just hopping off the bandwagon. I understand on paper this is a harder matchup against Luis Castillo than we've seen in some of the recent games. But even with that aside, they're only projected for 2.5% ownership today. And this is a team we've seen pretty regularly, 20, 30% ownership as of late. I don't think one bad game should cause the ownership to drop this significantly, but I think recency bias is playing a factor here. And as far as Luis Castillo goes, while he is a really good pitcher historically, we've seen him get off to slow starts. He got off to a really slow start last year, and this year it's been the same case. He opened up the year in AAA, and after getting called up, it hasn't been terrible, but not great either. 4.35 ERA, but a really low strikeout rate, and I do have some reasons to be concerned with Luis Castillo posting a career low 21.4% K rate. The big one being the velocity is down to 95.9 this year. And by most player standards, 95.9. He's still throwing the ball really hard. But keep in mind, Luis Castillo's pretty regularly thrown upper 90s. So last year he threw 97.3, and it dipped from 97.3 to 95.9 when somebody opened up the year injured and had a late start to the year as he rehabbed. It's concerning to me. So the Red Sox have really low ownership. I think this is a good point to get back on the Red Sox after the field has jumped off them. So those are a couple of tournament stacks I like today, but here's some good tournament pitchers, starting with Eric Lauer. And if we're paying up to be contrarian, I think Lauer makes sense, especially compared to the other guys at the top end, because we've got Kevin Gausman, Christian Javier. They're projected for 20 and 25% ownership on FanDuel today, but Eric Lauer is only projected for 0.5%. And if you look at our odds of these guys' chances to be a top scoring pitcher, Javier and Gausman are at 7 and 8%. But we've got Eric Lauer right there at 6%. So the difference in terms of odds to be a top scoring pitcher, not all that different across these three guys. It's actually almost identical. But Lauer's only a fraction of the ownership while he's projected for less than 1% ownership. He's at 10,600, but he's been so good this year, and I like his matchup against the Cubs, that I'm not really afraid of this price point here, because Eric Lauer is a 29.4% K rate. That is the best mark of his entire career. He also has a 2.31 ERA. And I know that Eric Lauer isn't some name brand pitcher, but if you take the name out of the equation and just look at the numbers, this is one of the best pitchers in the National League this year. So Eric Lauer, I think, warrants consideration, especially in this matchup against the Cubs and at really low ownership. One other thing to consider about the Cubs, who got totally neutralized last night by Aaron Ashby. Seiya Suzuki's on the injured list now, so this is going to be a watered-down lineup for the next week or so until he recovers. Let's jump on Eric Lauer, low ownership. The final spot that I'm going to point out here, George Kirby, only $7,000 over on FanDuel. And I know that when we're looking at FanDuel, low pitching prices, it's not quite as important as it is on DK, where we have to roster 2 pitchers. But I still think George Kirby warrants some consideration when he's this cheap and only projected for 3.5% ownership on FanDuel, because this is a pitcher that we've seen show pretty significant upside. He struck out 9 batters in his last start against the Oakland A's. He gets another positive matchup against the Baltimore Orioles today. Below average against right-hand pitching, a team that strikes out higher than league average overall. And I know a lot of people might look at the fact this game is being played at Camden Yards, and maybe that will scare you off some. But Camden Yards is totally different this year. In the offseason, the Baltimore Orioles changed the dimensions of the ballpark for reasons totally unknown to me, because basically here's what the Orioles did. They took a team that was terrible, but at least had some fun, high-scoring games. And instead, they made it a team that's still fairly terrible, but now just has lower-scoring games when they're at home, because with the new ballpark dimensions, Camden Yards has been a pretty pitcher-friendly ballpark this year. So George Kirby, once again, pitching against a bad offense, and now it should be a pitcher-friendly environment. And he is really, really good stuff. We've seen George Kirby hit 100 miles per hour as a starter this year. He has really, really sharp off-speed pitches that break a whole bunch. So there's going to be inconsistencies. There always is with young starting pitcher, but it's good that we've seen a couple of really strong individual outings and strikeout upside from him that I think makes sense to get on George Kirby as a low-owned GPP option on FanDuel. And also, if I had to roster one pitcher for salary savings on FanDuel, I would actually go with George Kirby, kind of, even if it wasn't for the ownership. So the low ownership, just an added bonus there. So to recap, for stacks and tournaments on FanDuel, I like the Boston Red Sox. I like the Colorado Rockies. For pitching tournament options, I like going Eric Lauer as a low-owned pivot option, and then George Kirby to save salary with. Once again, guys, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and good luck tonight.